Welcome to this explainer. Okay, today we're unpacking what honestly might be the greatest marketing pivot in human history. We're going to look at how a brand that literally started out making muddy trench tools somehow engineered the ultimate billionaire status symbol. And as we dig into this, we're really going to be tracking a super fascinating theme, the evolution of value through history. Like, how exactly does something go from being a purely functional tool to an emotional statement to basically a lucrative financial asset? Let's get into it. To really wrap our heads around this journey, we have to look at a massive modern paradox. Think about the sheer scale of Rolex today, right? They pump out roughly 1.2 million watches a year. That's a mind-boggling number of timepieces. Yet, if you stroll into any of their boutiques today, you're probably going to find completely empty display cases. And on top of that, their technology is, strictly speaking, mechanically outdated. But these watches still sell for millions of dollars at auction. So the million-dollar question is, how do you sell an obsolete machine to the richest people on Earth and actually make them beg for the privilege of buying one?
So, Era 1, value as pure utility. Let's look at how it all started. Imagine we travel back to the 1920s. Back then, calling a Rolex a luxury item would literally get you laughed out of the room. They weren't selling status. They were selling pure, unbreakable survival. In 1927, to prove their new Oyster case was actually waterproof, they had a British woman, Mercedes Gletz, wear it on a ribbon around her neck while she swam across the freezing English Channel for over 10 hours. And guess what? It didn't leak a single drop. Fast forward to the 1950s, and this tough-as-nails DNA had evolved into hardcore tactical tools. You had the Submariner for deep-sea divers, the GMT Master for transcontinental pilots, and the Daytona for professional racers. Rolex was the absolute go-to watch for the military because it could survive extreme punishment. It was basically the 1950s equivalent of a tactical survival knife.
Now, Rolex brilliantly capitalized on that whole Channel swim. They went and took out a massive front-page ad in the Daily Mail, proudly declaring it the watch that conquered the Channel. See, this wasn't about looking fancy at a dinner party. They were cementing their entire brand value around being a hardcore device for incredibly accurate and reliable timing, even under the harshest conditions on Earth. But then, everything changed. We hit the crisis of value.
So, tracking this history of value, we hit a massive roadblock in 1969. I'm talking an extinction-level event for the Swiss watch industry. And it was caused by a Japanese company named Seiko, dropping a total bomb on the market called the Astron. The Seiko Astron was a quartz watch, and suddenly the math looked absolutely terrible for the Swiss. Mechanical watches, they were complex, expensive, and required super careful maintenance. But quartz watches, they were wildly more accurate, required zero maintenance, and that tech eventually led to incredibly cheap plastic watches like the $100 Casio G-Shock. The military, the general public, everyone suddenly realized they could get an unbreakable, highly accurate watch for a fraction of the cost. From a purely practical standpoint, Rolex's core utility proposition, accurate timing, was instantly rendered worthless.
And the fallout? It was absolutely devastating. The Swiss watch industry was basically bleeding out. Because mechanical watches had become totally obsolete as functional tools, tens of thousands of watchmakers lost their jobs. So Rolex was suddenly staring down a massive, existential problem. How on earth do you survive when your primary function has been perfected by a way cheaper competitor?
Which brings us to Era 2, value as status.
Faced with absolute ruin, Rolex didn't do what you might expect. They didn't race to the bottom to compete with cheap batteries. No, they pulled off what has to be a legendary survival strategy. Step 1, they stopped selling a device that tells time and started selling an ego boost. Step 2, they took those outdated mechanical movements and completely rebranded them as rare, emotional, exclusive art. In Step 3, they aggressively raised their prices above the rate of inflation every single year. They hit on this profound psychological truth. In the luxury market, jacking up prices actually makes people want the item way more, simply because it acts as a very visible, undeniable signal of wealth.
To really cement this brand new elite vibe, Rolex shifted their marketing entirely. God where the Channel swims and muddy military missions, instead, they started heavily sponsoring the playgrounds of the ultra-rich. We're talking golf, yachting, equestrian show jumping, and Formula One. They aggressively repositioned themselves. They weren't the watch you wear to do the hard work anymore. They were the watch you wear only after you've conquered the world.
And then, enter the Rolex Day-Date. Now, this watch was an absolute masterclass in status signaling, because it was exclusively available in precious metals, like gold and platinum. Absolutely no cheap steel here. It was famously worn by U.S. President Lyndon B. Johnson, and Rolex brilliantly ran with that.
They marketed it in print ads right alongside a red White House telephone, officially dubbing it the President's Watch. The message was loud and clear. This is what ultimate power looks like. But you know, the real emotional pivot happened almost entirely by accident. Hollywood legend Paul Newman was gifted a Rolex Daytona by his wife Joanne Woodward, and on the back, she added this simple, deeply emotional engraving, "Drive carefully, me." Newman didn't lock this watch away in some safe. He wore it everywhere, on and off the race track. This sparked a massive shift in consumer psychology. Collectors weren't just buying steel and glass anymore. They were buying a story, an emotion, a literal piece of cultural history.
And decades later, in 2017, the ultimate result of that shift in value became crystal clear. Paul Newman's exact, scratched-up Daytona went to auction and totally shattered world records, selling for an unbelievable $17.75 million. Think about that. Mechanical accuracy didn't matter one bit. Cultural status was suddenly priceless.
Now we hit Era 3, value as a financial asset. Let's see how this evolved into the modern day.
Welcome to the present, where value has evolved yet again, this time into a financial asset completely ruled by artificial scarcity. To grasp this era, you really have to understand that today, Rolex is an absolute behemoth with massive vertical integration. I mean, they literally smelt their own gold and patented oyster steel in their planless Watts facility. They manufacture their own dials in Schöneberg. They even recently bought up Bucher, which is one of the world's largest watch retailers. That allows them to control everything, right down to the final swipe of your credit card. And with all of this massive infrastructure, they are pumping out roughly 1.2 million watches a year.
Which honestly brings us right back to our opening question, the artificial scarcity paradox. Despite this massive production line churning out well over 1 million watches annually, authorized dealer display cases are completely bare. Why is that? Well, because it's a highly calculated move. Rolex artificially restricts the supply that actually reaches the stores, keeping it far, far below the actual market demand. By intentionally refusing to sell everyone a watch, they create this fascinating, almost crazy dynamic. If you go to an authorized dealer, you're met with years-long wait lists. So what happens? This forces desperate, wealthy buyers straight into the secondary or gray market. Over there, the watches are immediately available, sure, but they immediately flip for 50 to 150% over their original retail price.
This engineered scarcity has literally turned a consumer product into a high-performing financial asset. I'm not kidding. Rolex watches essentially perform like blue-chip stocks right now. Just look at the Daytona. It alone has surged over 350% in value over the last 15 years. People are buying them today simply because they know the watch is going to hold its worth or even jump in value the exact second they walk out of the store.
So Rolex didn't just survive the death of the mechanical watch. They brilliantly redefined what makes something valuable throughout history. They completely transformed an obsolete tool into an emotional status symbol and finally into a rock-solid financial asset. Which really leaves us to wonder, when you buy a luxury item today, are you actually purchasing a physical product, or are you just buying the brilliant, highly engineered illusion of scarcity? Definitely something to chew on next time you look at a luxury price tag. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and remember to always keep questioning the value of the things around you.